Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a Tuesday mailbag edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. I am Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. weekdays. And appreciate you guys tuning into the podcast, tuning into the radio show. A quick administrative reminder off the top before we get into the mailbag. And we're going to go right into the mailbag today. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and review it. If you're new to the podcast, hit the subscribe button. It is, at the very least, been an intriguing Texans season so far. I would say overall it's been a successful Texans season with some glitches or areas of concern that could impact future success that we will, I promise, get into in the mailbag here shortly. But if you hit that subscribe button, helps out the podcast, helps you out too. It just makes life easier on you. And that's really what it's all about, making life easy. Avoiding pain and deriving pleasure. Those are the two human instincts. Hitting the subscribe button will affect both of those. You get the pleasure of getting the podcast sent to you directly, and you don't have to go through the pain of trying to find it. How's that? How's that for a sales pitch? We're going to do a mailbag here shortly. A quick reminder as well. houmailbag@gmail.com is the email address. We're getting more and more emails, so send them in. Having to get a little more selective about which ones I use. So if you send them in and they don't get used, know that I do save some of them if they evergreen, fine. But either way, houmailbag@gmail.com. Keep them tight, keep them concise, keep them short, and get right into it. So that's all I ask. houmailbag@gmail.com. So we will dig into the mailbag here in a second. It's a Tuesday, so it's a players' day off for the Houston Texans. D'Amico Ryans met with the media yesterday. He and CJ Stroud will meet with the media again tomorrow. The press conference I'm most looking forward to this week is Bobby Slowick on Thursday. So the coordinators always go on Thursday. It's always weird to look back at the game the previous weekend as late as Thursday in the week, especially with a game as big as this one coming up with the Indianapolis Colts. This is one of the biggest games of the year coming up on Sunday. But I think there's a lot of questions for Bobby Slowick about what happened on offense on Sunday. You guys have a lot of questions in this mailbag about what the hell happened on offense on Sunday. And I feel like for the first time since he became head coach here, D'Amico Ryans is starting to get more and more questions about a couple things. One, in-game stuff, procedural stuff, things like not challenging a potential fumble recovery on Sunday. What exactly was going on the final possession where you looked like you were trying to run the clock out and then throw an incomplete pass, which I don't think he had great answers for in his press conference. And then obviously with what's going on offense, you can't just keep doing the same thing. You either need to change something scheme-wise or you need to change something personnel-wise, one or the other. And D'Amico Ryans did say everything is on the table this week. So we'll see exactly what that means. We'll find out more on Wednesday when they get out to practice and we see who's running with the ones or if there's been any changes coaching-wise. I highly doubt there's going to be any changes with the coaching staff at this stage in the season. D'Amico seems to be putting more on the players than the coaches at this point. The players' ability, I'm talking offensive line right now, and tight ends, or inability to carry out the system. So that's where we are. 5-2, 2 losses. If you're 5-2, this is about as I would say friendly a 5-2 as you can be. Both losses are outside of the AFC. The Minnesota loss was really bad. So you get a bad loss out of your system. You should have won the Green Bay game. I know some people are saying that. Maybe if you handle the last 2 minutes differently, you come out victorious. I think the Texans were a little lucky to be in that game, honestly. But you're 5-2. You've been in a lot of close games, which you can look at one of two ways. I think, one way is those games should not have been nearly as close, a lot of them, as they were. The other is you're going to play in a lot of close games down the stretch, and theoretically the Texans should be comfortable playing in those types of games. 11-4 now is D'Amico Ryans' record in one-score games as a head coach. I think that's more than just a blip. I don't think that's a small sample size. I think D'Amico Ryans is a good coach in tight games like that, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So this will be a big one on Sunday, man. Indianapolis, you lose that game, you're in a virtual tie for first in the division. You're 5-3, and you're basically almost starting over in the division. You and the Colts will have beaten each other, so you split those, and you're both 5-3. I don't think the Titans and the Jaguars are going to be a factor in this thing. So it's a two-team race, as I thought it would be before the season. I had the Colts as the second best team in the AFC South. That's why I thought that week 1 was the most important game on the schedule. I know it wasn't the sexiest game on the schedule. There are plenty of games sexier than in Indianapolis in week 1, but empirically, if winning the division is the gateway to get into the postseason, and I think for the Texans it is, then that Indianapolis game in Indy was the most important game on the schedule. Road game against the second best team in the division. You got the win. So now you've got a chance to really get a stranglehold on this division. You lose, you're both 5-3. Not the end of the world, but boy, look at the Texans schedule coming up. And now, boy, now you're paddling a little bit upstream. You win this game, you're 6-2, and you've got what amounts to a 3-game lead in the division, 2 games in the standings over the Colts, and then you have the head-to-head tiebreaker over them at 2-0. So they would have to beat you by a full game in the standings to win the division. That's big stuff. So I'm confident in the Texans. Spoiler alert, I will be picking the Texans in this game on Sunday. So, but we'll dig into that more in the preview episode later this week. But huge game against the Colts, and really a back end of the schedule that's a whole lot of fun. We'll get into that in the mailbag here. We've got some schedule questions in the mailbag. All right, there's a ton of offensive line questions, so I'm just going to get to those right out of the chute and rapid fire these. Charles Honeycutt asks, is it fair to say we might need to bench Kenyon Green? Other than some of the big run plays, Green has been a major disappointment protecting CJ. I think that's in play. When DeMeco Ryan says everything is on the table, I think benching Kenyon Green, if this were an actual table with various dishes on it, like a Thanksgiving table, I think benching Kenyon Green is somewhere in between like the potatoes au gratin and the full-on turkey. Like it's one of the larger items on the table, I think. Because you've got viable solutions behind him. Look, Kendrick Green was okay, but replacing Kenyon Green last year. Jarrett Patterson played guard in college. I don't know if either of those guys are better than Kenyon Green, but I know it would take a hell of a lot for them to be worse. So I think that's definitely in play. Rick Tyndall asks, I'm not broken up about a Green Bay game we weren't favored to win anyways. I am pissed about the fact that little if anything was done in the last offseason to improve a dreadful offensive line, and the lack of attention to it is showing the results that we should have expected. Considering midseason coaching changes rarely provide success, and considering we've got over $50 million committed to 2 players, Tunsil and Howard, in 2025, what can and should be done? I don't know that there's a lot they can do this season other than look at other solutions in-house at those positions and hope that maybe you get a better pop out of that, out of some tweaks along the offensive line. Look, as long as they're healthy, Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard are going to be the tackles for this team. I like Blake Fisher, and who knows, I don't think they're going to be replacing Tunsil. Titus Howard has not been great this year, and Titus looks fat to me. He looks overweight. So maybe at some point that could be something that's on the table. I don't think it's as big a table item as benching Kenyon Green. Replacing Titus with Blake Fisher is a smaller table item. Probably like some green bean casserole or something like that, But I don't know that they can do anything till after the season with this group. And even with this group, the financial commitment makes it impossible to do anything during the season this year. Now, next year, without getting too deep in the numbers, because I don't know how podcast friendly it is, Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard next year, to move on from them, you would get a small cap savings from moving on from either of them. I think Tunsil is slated to be 25 or 26 million against the cap if they were to cut or trade him. And it would be a trade. Someone would trade for Laramie Tunsil. I don't know what they trade at this point. Not 2 firsts and a second. I promise you that, like Bill O'Brien did. But they'd save a few $1,000,000. I think similar with Titus Howard as well. So I think any big changes, like sweeping changes and coaching as well, are going to come in the offseason. Hopefully they fix what's wrong. Hopefully they fix what ails this line. I think, to me, the biggest problem with this line is more of a culture issue than it is a communication or an athleticism issue. I think these guys are all skilled. I don't think they're dumb. They play dumb at times. I just wonder how much dog is in them. So that's something you can't just go get. You don't turn into a dog all of a sudden. All right, Alex in London, regarding the O-line issue, let me just say, I promise the whole podcast isn't going to be about the O-line. I think I've got 2 more O-line questions, and then we'll move on. Because I hate talking about the offensive line, but I know a lot of people like hearing about the offensive line. O-line issues. Does any fault lie at CJ's feet? If so, what percent? Obviously, there's some big mistakes. This is from Alex in London. Sorry, Alex. And shout out to London. Obviously, there's some big mistakes by the linemen themselves that they can't control, e.g., Titus Howard tripping over his own feet. He actually got tripped by Dalton Schultz on the play you're talking about. Of course, immediately got up and pointed at Schultz like, I wasn't me that fell. I got stepped on. But also against the Packers, it seemed like there were a lot of unblocked pass rushers and scheme assignment issues. Isn't part of the QB's job pre-snap to identify the blitz and help organize the protection? It is. I don't know what percent is on CJ. I just know that it's everybody's deal. I can tell you just from being a semi-educated football watcher, I put most of it on the offensive line. But yeah, CJ's definitely culpable. To what degree, I'm not sure. It's a problem for everybody. Darren says, Darren asks, I know everyone is going to be talking about the O-line, as they should. You are correct, Darren. My take on the O-line is they've become a reflection of their captain. That would be Laramie Tunsil. Lazy, weak, and just going through the motions to collect the check. Could taking away his C and sitting him light a fire underneath him, or light a fire underneath the offensive line. I don't know how much. No, my answer is no. If you took the C away from Laramie, I don't know that lights a fire under him. Laramie, my armchair psychologist would be, if you were to rip the C off of Laramie, you'd get an even worse version of Laramie Tunsil. So let him keep his C. I think people in the locker room they're not dumb. They know who the leaders are on this team. I like to think, although this is the same group that voted Laramie a captain, so who knows? But your theory, your hypothesis, Darren, I agree with, that you look at all the other rooms in the building over at NRG Stadium, and there's at least one, if not more people in. And when I say the rooms, I'm talking about the position groups. There's at least one, if not more, people in practically every other position group room over there, where I go, okay, well, that guy's the guy who's going to take that position group by the lapels and shake them and say, we need to be better. I think they've got a lot of guys in the building like that, especially on defense. So the overall building over overall the Texans are in a really good spot overall. I don't want to lose sight of that. But yeah, I don't think there's anybody like that in the O-line room. And if they are, they're not in a position right now to really be that sort of guy to this room. You know, Laramie Tunsil, and by infection, Titus Howard, are the fashionistas that lead the offensive line room. And it is what it is. And I think our best hope is that, one, obviously they start to play better, but two, I think there probably needs to be some changes scheme-wise. I think everybody would be better served in this offense if they spread things out a little bit. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, Bobby Slowick this year has decided to confine all 11 guys in a much tighter space on just regular downs, first and second down, third down sometimes. It ain't working, man. It ain't working. Bobby Slowick's gotten worse. The offense has gotten worse. The offensive line has gotten worse. And the crazy thing is, it's the same group of guys that were on offense for the Texans last year, except for a few spots. And at those spots, they have upgraded. So it's not like they lost anybody in free agency where you're like, oh, boy. I mean, that'll happen someday when you're paying C.J. Stroud $60 million a year. But for now, you've been bringing pieces in and extending guys, and it's worse. So if I'm an owner of an NFL team that knows I'm going to be looking for a coach, Bobby Slowick is off my speed dial right now. All right. I think that does it for offensive line questions. Appreciate you guys. Don't stop sending in O-line questions. Just know that if I sound annoyed, it's not with you guys. It's with the offensive line. TJ in Fort Worth, I'm starting to get the feeling the Texans aren't very good at self-scouting again, or am I reading into something that isn't there? It's a good question. I do think that Bobby Slowick is really, really, really married to his scheme. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say the Texans as a team are not good at self-scouting. I would say in certain areas they are a little bit delusional as to what they might be, and the offense might be one of those. If if that's what self-scouting is, then yeah, I think the offense for sure needs sort of an identity change. Appreciate the email, TJ. Bobby from the Hill Country has a couple questions. Do you know if or when Jeff Okudah will be back to contribute at some point? I do not. And they need him back because D'Angelo Ross as your number 2 cornerback is brutal. Now they're going to get Kamari Lassiter back before they get Jeff Okudah back, if they get Jeff Okudah back. But that this team is sitting here with D'Angelo Ross as a starting cornerback right now is not good. Not good at all. Would love to see a trade. Bobby's other question, John Mechie, will we see him on the field contributing at some point? He is getting snaps. He's been active the last few weeks. Bobby says, I expected to see something at least thrown in his direction with Nico and Woods out. The problem was CJ had no time to throw to anybody on Sunday. So I don't even know if we can discern if Mechie was, a sliver of the game plan because CJ was just running for his life the whole time. There's really nothing we can take away about what the team's plans were to do with guys because by 1 second after the snap, CJ Stroud's running for his life. There's a lot of people, we get a lot of texts to the show, like, why is Xavier Hutchinson getting more snaps than John Mechie? Because he's better at football right now. I know Mechie was a second-round pick. I know we love his story. I know by the end of camp, Mechie was playing just as well as Xavier Hutchinson, it seemed. Hutchinson's a more consistent player, and right now he's a better player. And it's I was going to say it's tough to argue. I just don't even feel like arguing. We're talking about the 4th and 5th receivers on the team. So, Mechie, if Mechie's going to separate himself from the pack, he's got to play better. France in the North emails in. What can Nick Caserio really do to help address the O-line realistically with the trade deadline not too far away? Or will this team be stuck with this group to just try and figure it out? I said we were done with O-line questions, but I like France in the North. So I'll answer his. But I think you can tell from what my answers were earlier, France, is that this is the group. That, of all groups, to go trade for a piece at the trade deadline, unless you lose your left tackle or something like that to an injury and you just feel like, man, we just can't go with a backup the rest of the year. Go find somebody who runs a similar system. But the offensive line is a group where it's, 5 guys in concert working with one another. That's what makes making changes even in-house such a drag. So I don't think they're going to trade for O-line help. I think they're going to hope that it's in the building right now, or that these guys start to click and they start to get it. So for now, we're stuck with this group. Now, I could definitely see changes in the offseason for sure. France also says, do you feel like teams have just figured out the tendencies of how Bobby operates the offense, or is he too rigid with his play calling? 100% I feel like they figured him out. 100%. And 100% I feel like he's too rigid in his play calling. Yes, all of it. He's predictable. He's rigid. And I think that's why the results in the second half this year have been so piss poor. I don't know if you heard me sharing numbers on the show today on Payne and Pendergast, but I'll share them here. The Texans have scored 6 touchdowns in the second half of football games this year. Total. In 7 games, they've scored 6 second-half touchdowns. 4 of those came in the Colts game in week 1 and the Patriots game in week 6. So in the other 5 games, in the Bears, Vikings, Jaguars, Bills, Green Bay games, they scored 2 second-half touchdowns. And hardly any points in at least 3 of those games, if not 4. I think those were the only points they scored, or they kicked a field goal. Maybe like in the ones where they didn't score a touchdown, they kicked a field goal. Like they haven't been shut out in the second half of any games. But they haven't scored more than 7 points in the second half of any games. Of those 5, the New England and the Indianapolis games they did. But that's a big chunk of your schedule where you're getting nothing in the second half. I mean, honestly, that they're 3-2 in those games really says a lot about the defense. So shout out to the defense, man. Like that you've managed to elevate and prop up an offense that's been that shitty in the second half of games is super commendable. And there's no excuse for this offense being that bad in the second half of games. But yeah, the evidence would dictate that Bobby has absolutely gotten figured out, predictable, rigid, something, or else this team, who has CJ fucking Stroud at quarterback, wouldn't be such dog shit in the second half. Now I'm getting mad. All right, what do you miss? Okay, France has one other question. That's good. This is a good palate cleanser because this isn't a question that's going to get me mad. What do you miss most? Programs, like game programs or physical tickets? Would have loved the physical tickets to frame from the Texans game we went to. Yeah, for those who don't know, France in the North's family came down to Texas for their first Texans game. Again, the game against the Bills they were here for. Beautiful family. It was awesome getting to meet France, you and your family in person. His daughter gave me this my nice little Texans Utopia friendship bracelet that I wear. So that was cool. To answer your question, physical tickets is what I miss. I've got a box full of tickets from events I went to. Really, I mean, going back as far as like when I was a kid, and as recently as however recently they stopped using physical tickets. But I think tickets are just so cool. They got the seat number on there. You can see what the price of the game was back then, back in the day. I think physical tickets are a really underrated keepsake, I think, from games. I love programs too. They're just a little bulkier. That's all. If you start to keep too many programs, I've got 4 boxes of old Sports Illustrateds in our storage unit here in our building that we live in that I've been dragging around with me for years. I've pissed off 2 wives with all those Sports Illustrateds I'm dragging around. But I think I've said this on the podcast before. My dream someday is to have a man cave where I wallpaper at least one of the walls with old Sports Illustrated covers, especially now that Sports Illustrated is a dinosaur. It's basically done. I mean, they send you like 1 issue a month. Man, back when they were doing it weekly, it was so cool. You know, it's showing up on Thursday every week, man, Sports Illustrated. And the days it didn't show up on Thursday were a bummer. So I got that idea of doing that from an old sporting goods store that was in my hometown, Vincent's Sporting Goods Store. One of their locations had just all Sports Illustrated covers on the wall, and I thought that was the coolest thing. So I've got SIs going back to like the late 70s into the mid 90s that I've wanted to deploy in that fashion. And I have literally been dragging them around from house to house. I mean, I've moved no fewer than a dozen times probably since moving out of my folks' house in the early 90s. And what comes with me every time? Gigantic moving boxes full of Sports Illustrateds. And it pissed off my ex-wife. I don't think Amy's super happy that we're dragging these things around just because of the space they eat up. And I'm sure when Amy dumps me and I marry some future wife that I'm just joking. Amy's not dumping me. I mean, maybe I shouldn't get too cocky. I'm not dumping her. Sorry, ladies. Okay. All right. France in the North, thanks for the question. Physical tickets is the answer. KT from League City. Been a listener since last season. I love the podcast. Thank you, KT. Now to my question. Have fans been too comfortable with poor offense because the Texans have managed to win? I just did some math against teams. I love this. KT, good job. Against teams with current winning records, the Texans have scored a total of 36 points in the second half. Thank you. 17 of those points came against the Colts in week 1. Oh, my God, KT, you're my spirit animal. Am I being too brash to say Slowick should be on the hot seat? Thanks, KT from League City. I would say no. Not too brash to say it. Do I think he's on the hot seat is a separate question. Is it too brash to say he should be on the hot seat? Of course not. It's an opinion. Should he be on the hot seat? No. No, probably not. He needs to fix this shit. And if they keep doing what they're doing, I'll tell you what gets him on the hot seat. If CJ Stroud gets hurt because the offensive line is a bunch of dipshits in a game, that's what would get Slowick on the hot seat with fans for sure. I have no idea what D'Amico thinks about him because we haven't had to think this way with D'Amico. We've not had to read between the lines with D'Amico as to what he thinks about his assistant coaches because we've been in this honeymoon period the entire time he's been here. Even with some of the failures of last year, you write it off as first year stuff. Well, it's not the first year anymore. So, as far as your original question, KT, have the fans been too comfortable with poor offense because the Texans have managed to win? I don't know if too comfortable is the word. Look, I host a post-game show, and granted, the post-game show and social media are places where people are going to congregate with more negative thoughts than positive thoughts, generally speaking. So I don't think anybody who's been communicating with me has been too comfortable. Like, if anything, I feel like and I'll put myself in the same group with those folks, have probably been overly negative about a team that's 5-2, just based purely on their record. But I think but we're not dummies. You know what I mean? Like the schedule gets harder. This stuff that you're doing, you can't keep doing it. You definitely can't keep doing the things that you did on Saturday or Sunday, I should say, against the Green Bay Packers. You know what I mean? I'm not glad they lost, but a silver lining of them losing is that we got to really dig in on the things that are wrong with this team without sounding greedy. You know, they were 6-1. Because think about it, if Brandon McManus misses that field goal, the only thing that changes is the final score of the game. It doesn't change all the horse shit and gaga that we saw for 60 minutes before that. And yet, if they were 6-1, there would certainly be an element of the fan base that would be like, why are you guys harping on the offensive line? They're 6-1. We're getting it with them being 5-2. So if they were 6-1, we would get that. But this is so crucial. You know, the penalties and the deep shot plays against the Colts and things like that, you know, those are mistakes that were very, very perplexing. This is one that literally puts your quarterback in serious danger. Like, I don't think people understand like that when we're harping on this thing, it's because it's so important. It's because CJ Stroud is, I mean, essential is an understatement. Like you go nowhere without him this season. Certainly you go nowhere that you aspired to go to before the season started. So, man, that offensive line just keeps popping up. You know what I mean? My man Middle Screen is in. And he says, by the way, KT, thank you. That was a good email. I enjoyed that. What is the likelihood, this is Middle Screen, what is the likelihood Bobby Slowick is the offensive coordinator for the Texans next year? Okay, this is a good question to build off of from the previous email from KT in League City about Bobby Slowick. She asked about the hot seat, the hot seat factor for Bobby Slowick. Now Middle Screen is asking the likelihood of him being here next year. I think it's probably pretty low because we're kind of at a fork in the road right now with Bobby Slowick. It's going to go one of two ways the second half of the season. Either this offense is going to figure it out and this Texans team makes a deep run in the postseason, which to me would put Bobby Slowick back on the radar for a lot of teams. And my guess is he would take a head coaching job at this point. This is probably these first 7 weeks have probably been, I don't want to say a wake-up call to Bobby Slowick, but probably something that he's tucking away, kind of like just a feeling that he's tucking away, going, okay, I don't need to, if I get offered a head coaching job, I should take it. I don't need to come back and watch my stock fluctuate the way it's fluctuated this season. The flip side is if they continue to struggle offensively and the offense is the reason why the Texans don't accomplish all the things that they've gone all in on doing this year, I could definitely see a scenario where the Texans move on from Bobby Slowick, which is, it sounds crazy to say from before the season, but it is drastic how mediocre this offense is right now with everything they've got going for it. There's no excuse for them to look the way they looked in a huge game like that on Sunday against Green Bay. So do I think if we see a few more games like Sunday, we know they're capable of games like that. We just saw it. If we see more games like that, could Bobby Slowick get fired? Hell yes, he could. I'm rooting for Slowick, obviously. I'm a Texan fan, and I like Bobby Slowick. John Thompson says, you mentioned salty snacks on the mailbag. Okay, this is good. This is a good little email right here because this a little break from football for a couple minutes. I recently found a killer snack at H-E-B in their bakery department. They're called garlic munchies. They come in a bag, and it's essentially a long baguette sliced into crackers, baked with a ton of garlic. Get a bag and a container of H-E-P jalapeno cream cheese. You can thank me later. John, you must think I'm the biggest stoner of all time. That sounds like some serious stoner stuff. Now, I do have some edibles in that cabinet over there, and I'm not afraid to use them. That sounds really good. I'm not a big garlic guy, but I don't mind them. That sounds good to me. I don't like a lot of garlic in like in my tomato sauce or my pasta dishes. You know, like if you have not a sauce, not like a tomato sauce, but like sometimes you have pasta in like a wine sauce or a butter sauce or whatever. It's got garlic. That I'm not into that, but like I love garlic bread, and this sounds like basically like a cracker version, not cracker like white person like me, like cracker like Ritz's, cracker version of garlic bread. That sounds good. And jalapeno cream cheese, I am down for that. I must have said on a previous, well, John says it here. I mentioned salty snacks in the mailbag. Yeah, salty snacks are my vice, man. I ate half a bag, and when I say a bag, like family-size bag of corn chips before I started this podcast today. It's bad, man. And yet I'm still keeping the weight off. I'm going to go down to the gym right after this. So don't you worry about me, people. This Utopia podcast ain't going anywhere. All right, we've got a few. Wow, we have more than a few more. Okay, let's keep it moving. Justin says 2 questions. Now that we're 6 weeks into the season, which offseason rumor for the Texans do you wish would have happened versus what actually happened? For example, we signed Diggs, but we tried to get Keenan Allen, tried to get Christian Wilkins, ended up with Danielle Hunter, Mixon versus Barkley, etc. That's a good one because I think Diggs versus Allen, I'll take Diggs. Wilkins versus Hunter, I'll take Hunter. I don't know if they were ever in on Christian Wilkins. Mixon versus Barkley is an interesting one because Saquon Barkley is having an offensive player of the year level season. So I guess that might be the only one, like just the next level explosiveness that Barkley brings. Like Mixon has broken off some runs that have been great that I think Barkley probably takes to the house. So it's probably that one. And yet, like I love Joe Mixon. I'm perfectly happy with Joe Mixon. I don't know that there were any other like big ones, like big rumors for the Texans out there that I can think of off the top of my head because they were pretty static with a lot of their position groups. So it'll probably be the Mixon and Barkley one. Another one from Justin. Last year we saw the offense really stretching the field and stressing the defense. Why haven't we seen that as much this year? Do you feel like we've utilized the speed and receiving core that we have? Unquestionably, we have not utilized the speed and the receiving core that we have. Like, that's just fact. It's not even an opinion. I think the Texans are getting played by defenses the way a lot of defenses are playing explosive passing teams. A lot of cover 2. Keep things in front of you. Make them try to run the football. Force us out of cover 2. I think that's why. And then you've got games like last Sunday against Green Bay where it doesn't even matter what coverage scheme they're in. The front 7 is eating you up so quickly that it doesn't even matter. Like the O-line is so bad, you know, they could be in cover, fill in any number, and you suck. Thanks, Justin. Mario, hi, I'm from San Antonio. Do you think they'll start resting CJ towards the end of the season or keep the pedal to the ground until the last game? It depends. If they're trying to clinch a playoff spot or clinch a bye in the first round or clinch home field for the first couple rounds of the playoffs, CJ will play. If they've got nothing to play for, then maybe CJ sits a game, or maybe they, it all depends. Like if you wind up with the bye, I mean, look, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. Like if you wind up clinching a bye, there's only one bye. I don't even want to think about this. The only scenario I could see CJ sitting down the stretch would be if they can't change their outcome, or they can't change where they are in the playoff pecking order in week 18. That's the only scenario that I could see them doing that. And I'd be fine with that, by the way. But I don't think they're going to rest him. Like CJ's fine, like physically. Aiden, I know this is the Utopia Football Podcast and not the Petty Cast, but I've got petty problems, and I thought there'd be no better place to vent than the confession booth of Mr. Petty Pendergast himself. Good choice, Aiden. Let's see what you got for me. Will you stand with me in rooting for the downfall of the Eagles for one simple reason? That reason is Saquon Barkley, who had the audacity to put his stock in the Eagles, who looked like they could fall apart at any moment, when he could have gone to the Texans, who sit upon the 5-1 mountain, drinking fine wine and scoffing at the rest of the league. I like that laugh at the end. Now, you said the 3-2 Eagles and the 5-1 Texans. So obviously this email was sent before the Green Bay game. I think Saquon Barkley's from the Northeast. I don't know that he was ever coming here. He certainly was not coming here for a discount. And I think we got to acknowledge that Nick Caserio did admit they were in on Saquon Barkley in one of his interviews that he did with John Harris and Mark Vandermeer. He said early on this season that they were in on Saquon Barkley. But the reports were they were $2 or $3 million a year below. So I can't blame Saquon Barkley for taking more money and staying in a part of the country and wanting to stick it to the Giants. I think that's, and boy, did he ever this past weekend. JT in League City, love Utopia, longtime Payne and Pendergast listener as well. While he's had his moments prior to the Packers game, Stroud is looking lost at times in every game. This performance against Green Bay was terrible, and I felt like I could see this kind of performance coming based on Stroud's season so far, despite how awesome Mixon has been. he had something good with Nico, and now it feels like we're seeing proof of a D-Hop Deshaun dynamic where CJ can't do much to an average or better defense without Nico. Am I crazy, or is CJ having a sophomore slump? I don't think he's having a sophomore slump. I don't think the line's been great in front of him. Again, defenses are playing him differently. We got to remind you, CJ Stroud's still number 3 on the MVP odds board. Going into the Green Bay game, he was still leading the league in passing yards per game. Now, he's been a little more careless with the football this year. I think that's the most concerning thing, is that he's, thrown almost as many interceptions through 6 weeks as he had through almost the entirety of last season. So I think that's the thing. I don't read anything off of body language or looking lost at times. I don't see that he's looking lost at times. I just don't. So is he having as good and efficient a season as he was last year? I don't think so, just based on the turnovers. But CJ Stroud is an absolute positive for this team. I put that Green Bay, it's definitely partially on him. He's got to be better. There's no question. But it's absurd how many free runners were coming at him during that game. It's just stupid. P.S. from JT in League City. It was completely embarrassing when CJ was flopping, trying to draw an unsportsmanlike on the Green Bay bench. Pathetic. Yes and no. I mean, look, gamesmanship. Look, in a game, I'm going to give CJ a pass on that. I was not expecting it. I'll put it that way. You're right about that. It does seem out of character for CJ. I don't know how much he flopped, by the way. 93 did look like he kind of put his shoulder in there, but CJ may have exaggerated it. He may have Euro'd that one. I'm going to give him a pass just because that was their best chance of getting 15 yards in that game on Sunday, was him flopping to try to draw an unsportsmanlike. I thought what was more pathetic was his offensive lineman casually strolling over there to defend him as opposed to maybe jogging lightly, sprinting perhaps. Come on now. All right, 2 more. Chuck in Denver. I don't want to overreact. The team has done well overall. We should be proud of them and expect more from them, but this team will not win important games until the O-line can protect Stroud. We have the personnel. Do you think this is something that can be coached up? I can't imagine Ryans is okay with how they performed and we'll be looking for answers. I think I've hit everything on the O-line. So, Chuck, no disrespect. I don't have anything left on the offensive line. So, do I think they can be coached up? Sure. Do I think they need to wake the hell up? Yes. They just need to fucking play better so we don't have to talk about this anymore. I'm not mad at you guys for sending in O-line questions. They're legit questions. It's just, you do it for a post game, you do it for 4 hours, and it's not just this week. And it's also preventable. It's not because they're not talented. It's because they play stupid and they play careless. All right. Joe Q in last on the day. Let's finish up here. Do you expect the Texans to add a third QB to the 53 who has starting experience? I feel like the odds are near 100% that the Texans will make the playoffs. Well, let's wait and see how Sunday goes, but I think they're going to win. The odds of getting 2 QBs hurt in the same game are probably 1 in 500, but it did happen to the Niners and killed their Super Bowl chance. What do you think about a Trevor Siemian? Played a lot of NFL football under Gary Kubiak, or an equivalent versus value you get from 11th DB and 8th linebacker. In other words, the other things you would use a 53rd spot on is what Joe Q is saying. Maybe you think, quote, if we have Trevor Siemian in a playoff game, we're going to lose anyway, so might as well let Jalen Petrie or Cade Stover play QB if the top 2 guys get hurt. And Joe Q says, I'm not that fatalistic, especially with a good defense. I absolutely think in a playoff situation, you can win a one-and-done game with a backup quarterback. Bill O'Brien did it a ton his first couple of years here. So I 100% think that you can, and I think it's a good idea. Adding a third QB to the 53, I think it would be a good idea. I'm trying to think. I don't know if they carry any on the practice squad right now or not. I'd have to go look. I haven't looked at the practice squad in a while. But if they have one there, then that's somebody you can elevate. They've got elevation rules for quarterbacks. But a veteran guy, yeah, that might not be a bad idea. Last one from Joe Q here. He sent me 2 questions. Now that we're 7 games in, can you refresh your must-win, coin flip, steal assessment for the rest of the schedule? Some teams, notably the Jets and Cowboys, look less menacing than in August, while Detroit are better than we expected. Okay, so let's do that. So before the season, I put games into buckets. Must-win games are ones where you are a heavy favorite, especially at home. Favorite of, I would say, like 4 or 5 points or more. Those are must-win. Now, my feeling is you need to win like all but one, at most 2 of those, depending on how many of those you have. Then the next bucket is the coin flip, which is, I would say, any game that, like for example, the Green Bay game this past weekend, where the spread is 3 one way or the other. That's a coin flip game. And then the other one is steals. Stealing a game means you're the underdog, and you got to get one of those. If there's 4 of them, you get 1. You get 2, you're laughing, but you got to steal 1. So I would say the final 10 games, as the Texans sit at 5-2. Let's go through this here. I would say must win. I would say Indy's must win. They're a 6-point favorite in that one. I would say the Jets are a coin flip. I would say that Detroit, I'm going to say coin flip right now because it's at home. Week 11 is the Cowboys. I'm going to say coin flip on the Cowboys. Even though that spread was 4.5 before the season, I think right now that spread would be much closer based on how the Cowboys have played. Week 12, home Tennessee is a must win. Week 13 at Jacksonville. I'm going to put that must win because it's a division game, and I think the Texans will be favored by, I think if they played right now in Jacksonville this week, the Texans would be favored by 4 or 5 points in that game. Even though they only beat them by 4 at home previously, but that's, you look more at the overall team than you do the previous result when it comes to these division games. So I'm going to put Jacksonville in must win. Then there's the bye. Then there's Miami. If they have Tua, that's probably a coin flip. So I'll put that in coin flip. Then we've got 3 games left. KC on the road absolutely is a steal. I'm going to put Baltimore as a steal as well. And then at Tennessee, final week of the season is a must win. Basically, the must wins, this breaks up very nicely because the must wins are the 4 division games. The coin flips are all the non-Chief Raven games. And then the 2 steals are the 2 best teams in the AFC. So there's some symmetry here. So let's go through my thing. If the must win, let's say they go 3-1 in the must wins. There's 4 coin flips. Let's say they go 2-2. And then let's say they split the steals. That would put them at 11-6 on the season, which was my prediction before the season. So I guess that's my way of saying that I'm still at 11-6. I actually think they're going to be 12-5 now because I think they'll do better than 2-2 in those. I think they're going to either sweep the division the rest of the way or they'll go 3-1 in those coin flipper games. Lose to Detroit, but I think maybe win the other 3. So good exercise though, Joe Q. I appreciate you making me do that. That makes me feel good about my preseason prediction. Keep in mind, a big thing that I said before the season was the key to getting to 11-6 or better was going 6-2 in the first 8 games. I pounded that throughout the preseason. I thought the first 8 games were the most manageable part of the schedule because starting in week 9, you're playing a Thursday night game in primetime in New York where you got killed last year. And then you're off to the races in what is going to be a really fun stretch run of a schedule. This schedule is amazing. It's going to be so fun. So I'm glad you guys are along for the ride. Appreciate everybody weighing in on the mailbag. Good questions this week. And a reminder to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. There we go. And houmailbag@gmail.com. You guys have been looking at that the whole time if you've been watching on the stream. I'll be here on Friday morning. We'll drop a preview of the Colts game this week. That should be a whole lot of fun. And then we'll see 6-2 in the first 8 games. That's what we're going with. So big thanks to Anthony Irwin, my producer, for getting the podcast out to all of you guys. Big thanks to all of you for listening and sharing it with people as we roll on through this adventure called the 2024 Texans regular season. I am done for now. We'll see y'all later this week. Tune in to Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. weekdays on Sports Radio 610. Have a great day, everybody.